Nioh is a series well known for its combat, fast, furious, and intense in its execution and its desire to bring forth that flow state from the player. Particularly in the latest third title, there are two statements in the game I want to note foremost that tells you how much the developers wear their hearts on their sleeves and what they endeavor.
竹千代殿、礼を申す。忘れかけていた真理に再びたどり着けた。己に勝ち、公敵に勝ち、そして敵に勝つ。この心得を忘れず、今日の地を守るため、共に力を尽くそう。
生と死の境でのみたどり着ける権威の極みは、仏道の修行の末に見出す禅の心得に似たり。竹千代様はその極みに一歩近づいたように見えますな。どれ、久方ぶりに打ち合いましょうか。
If you were on the fence about the series, never heard of it, or just like to hear someone talk passionately about things that they like, here's a video for you. Oh, and I guess it's a review playing Nioh 3 for 48 hours or so and clearing practically all the content before New Game Plus. Watch out, spoilers of course. I love games with deep combat systems, as a lot of the coverage on this channel likely has some sort of that generally. And what better than this game to show you what I mean by a zen flow state than these games. I think although many people point towards the complexity of builds, exploits, or easy strategies and whatnot, though all of that's perfectly fine too, it is easy to optimize away the fun and forget how engaging it is to have a back and forth with enemies, particularly with the bosses. But most importantly, I want to note that although many people say that it is complex, I think this is often regarded as meaning that it's too difficult to get into and learn, which I want to argue against. Fundamentally, you keep building off what you know until you become comfortable with the next step. The idea of actively refining and honing some sort of combat skill is very much the basis of the series, and that is quite the rush in developing an understanding of the game that starts from simply responding to what's happening to becoming layered active decisions. These games are seriously worth the time and investment as these games grow with you as you grow with it. I'd probably consider this to be one of the best action game series period overall, but particularly in its ability to actively encourage the player to keep trying your best to one-up yourself. It's really a game about positive self-improvement. Somewhere in that process, it is no longer a struggle to get down what you need to do, and suddenly it is, how do I style on this dude in the best way possible that I know how? So yes, I want to give a bit of a nudge onto the other side, which many find the praise of such scope to be rather daunting or off-putting. I want to say that rather, it isn't so hard at all. Rather, it is one that encourages experimentation and an active element to its combat that's rather missing in most Souls-like games. That's distinctive as it expects you to keep up with what is happening while also formulating some kind of strategy on top of it. So I don't believe people when they say enemies have too much HP in these games. You don't just wait and see to make opportunities in Nioh. You're an active participant in producing the conditions to win instead of generally waiting for bosses to finish their attack strings to get 1 or 2 hits in. Look at you, From Software. They have enough HP to the point that they drill in the idea that you just don't sit back for expected and safe opportunities. Yeah, there are rather cheap or unfair game overs as it is a Souls-like by their own words, and some things might be, oops, I attacked when I shouldn't have, and proceed to have that familiar freed from the mortal coil pop up, but you get used to it. The point is, however, Nioh's design philosophy revels in pushing past these things, and that sense of inner attainment frankly puts other Souls-like games to shame. Unlike those games, however, it's a better guide in teaching you how to push forward in what you learned and how you're continuing to learn and applying it. Naturally, you are thinking of how to defeat your enemies in a more optimized or seamless manner, and that sort of active process in learning becomes expression, and in a way, artistic, if all the videos about cool combat showcases are to be believed for the likes of Devil May Cry and so on. If that's not your speed, however, there are ways to make the combat easier by choosing meta weapons and abilities, utilizing the elemental system, or various magic abilities which can alter enemy behavior or trivialize fights, but that's not really how I like playing these games. Ultimately, however, you'll reach that point in which you can punish everything a boss can throw out, and that feeling is exhilarating. Not many games hit that peak for me in that sense of tension of combat that Nioh provides, especially as you can approach it in so many ways. What I want to express now is how the foundations of the game make it more so that you are thinking, how do I come out on top, moment to moment, rather than thinking how difficult the boss is. So when you understand the game, you aren't really seeing it as a Souls-like anymore. It's more of a hack and slash experience like Ninja Gaiden or Devil May Cry, in which you want to pursue throwing everything in the kitchen sink into enemies after you found openings to exploit. That to me has always been the heart of the Nioh series, relentless pushback and adaptation. While there are many mechanics, they are kinda intuitive in of itself, you learn by doing. So a new player goes from struggling to keep up with various mechanics such as stance attack differences, standard and perfect key pulsing after attacks to retain your stamina bar, flux key pulse attacks to maintain combos, use of iframes, positioning, attack inputs, and guardian skills and summons, weapon swapping, to some point which suddenly all of these things and much more simply makes sense. Things like enemy weaknesses become more apparent, and then you see punish windows that you can capitalize on like it's second nature. You then harness that zen or flow state in which you are so in tune with what's happening that you surprise yourself with being able to magically perform combo after combo without thinking too hard about it. And that's the magic Nioh, just like Devil May Cry. You relish in your desire to actively get better at pulling off the coolest things that you can, and you can extrapolate off of it. Danger is no longer something you avoid, but actively pursue in reversing. And while that satisfaction of defeating a tough boss can be found similarly elsewhere, I think that sense of earning that victory is far more apparent here. You do a lot more on your end than simply responding to prompts, so to speak, as with most Souls-likes. As you become more familiar with the various mechanics, it feels like you're in control of the fight rather than being at the mercy of the enemy as with most Souls-like titles. To that end, I must note that this game is similar to the Monster Hunter series in the sense of repetition, which is good and bad. For instance, one complaint with the latest title is that you fight the same bosses often, and I partially agree that it's problematic as it adds on to the feeling that its open world structure blandness becomes more apparent. And yet, if you didn't have repeat fights, how would you know how to fight against them proficiently? Particularly if you don't use as many abilities or methods to skip the back and forth engagement in a fight, or if you want to learn how to use as many weapons and many options available. Anyway, they provide a good sense of training and experimentation as well. If you're familiar with these enemies, why not use another weapon or strategy? Make the most of each opportunity, as repeated fights existed in the prior Nioh games as well. But most importantly, a fun boss fight is a fun boss fight, so I didn't really mind it, though they absolutely should have done more in Nioh 3 to differentiate the repeated content in some manner in my opinion. It is ironic as well, as the Crucible Wraiths are one-time powered-up versions of the standard yokai that serve that purpose, alongside upgrading your summons. The similarity to Monster Hunter also applies to the loot grind that people seem to be put off by. To put it in perspective, these games are like 80% action, 15% menus, and 5% everything else. In that division, loot is probably most of the reason why you would go out your way to play and keep playing the game. Picking and examining through loot is quite a nice pastime in seeing what's available, and also acts as a cooldown period given how there isn't much more to these games besides fighting, as that's the whole point. Generally, you want higher rarity stuff, armor sets, and things that you think would be a best fit for your playstyle. Yeah, there are a lot of potential options, but it's rather simple to see what generally works or not for you and what you like. Again, experimentation is key I think to make sure you are engaging and continuing to engage with what the games offer. And once you familiarize yourself with it, I don't think it is an issue, as most of the problems is navigating these menus as a new player. So overall, the series has a somewhat longer onboarding process, but I very much think it's worth it in the end. Additionally, there are many options for loot drops, as you can change what rarity and what kinds of items you want, so it's really a non-issue and only takes a few buttons to tinker around with. So to relate my experiences with the latest Nioh, as no doubt if you're interested in the games, the question is, should you play the third one to start? Or should you even bother with this one overall? Generally, I'd say so, especially if you have the hardware to run it on PC, but I wholeheartedly recommend Nioh 2 as their best. I can't say if it is because I'm familiar with how their games work, or if I played too many character action games, but Nioh 3 was rather easy overall in difficulty, with a few bumps at spots, but I didn't struggle too hard overall. I don't particularly gear towards overpowered options, as I like to examine the whole process of what works for me. When I did struggle, I thought, well, there are immediate solutions I could utilize, but I chose not to because I'm stubborn. It's definitely more new player friendly than the rest of the series, and most importantly, if you've never played any of these games, it would likely be similar to Nioh 2's base game if you didn't use more of the overpowered stuff. Still easier overall though, I think. I want to note that I like choosing a new weapon domain when it comes to the series to make each experience as fresh as possible. When I tried Nioh originally, I played the Odachi or the Greatsword. For Nioh 2, it was the spear and then some axe. And while in this game I decided to make things more interesting by maining the standard sword, while also playing the Cestus and then the Odachi when I reached the new open world section. For New Game Plus, I plan on playing dual swords and Switchglaive, both of which I never used before, while finally giving ninja mode more of a chance. Which is to say, I played Nioh 3 almost exclusively in the samurai mode, focused primarily on a single weapon instead of using ninja. As many people report, and I personally agree, that ninja is definitely the easier way to play the game by bypassing or simplifying mechanics. But regardless, that's a personal choice, as I like tight timing mechanics and whatnot that helps you refine that Eastern martial arts philosophy that the games have going on. And I had a good old time, not as much as with Nioh 2, and you can kinda tell that the open world aspect is more of the by the numbers approach that leaves its areas rather homogeneous. It is nonetheless neat experimentation compared to the previous approaches with instance levels. Enemies did not feel as well integrated into these environments as they did with the older levels in terms of density or placement, but overall it strikes a good balance, I'd say. Otherwise you'd barely make progress through its open field designs if they place too many enemies in your way. There aren't too many new enemy designs, however, and that's a bummer. A lot of the bosses only took about 2 to 3 minutes at recommended levels with rather modest weapon and armor setups. In my opinion, the first cycle of the game is definitely leaning more on the exposure or onboarding aspect that these games have, so the game's difficulty will likely pick up more with extra New Game Plus cycles and whatnot. Nioh 3 definitely has an expedited pace on how you approach the areas that do not exploit the potential benefits of an open world level design. Most of the localities aren't too interesting in terms of verticality, depth, or overall scope, as it relies on a checkbox approach of gathering all the collectibles in a region. It definitely feels like they designed the map zones with X amount of things foremost and then built the maps around the need to split up content. A common complaint from those who dislike the game find this needless busywork, as that's the Ubisoft style of open world design that's rather generic. That's problematic as that applies to obtaining martial arts input attacks and skill points, so you have to interact with the majority of the content that isn't exactly as interesting as the few set pieces. There are usually a few neat areas in each map aside from the Crucible dungeons that resemble Nioh's older levels, but generally the older Nioh games are better at level design, even if it isn't their forte overall. But the thing is, I don't particularly play these games for their level design, as it's not really their focus, and I don't think that the open world necessarily improves on it. Furthermore, the final areas of the game don't feel as well polished as the earlier ones, as they decided to cram many things by the end that doesn't really make sense. For instance, some boss battles are simply generic middle or low tier yokai jumbled together for whatever reason, or just one by itself, without anything to differentiate it from their generic counterparts. I think most people will be fatigued by mid-game or so if you decide to hit up side quests first, as you face many yokai enemies that you've likely seen before in the previous maps, but I attribute this equally to the combat only nature of these games. Additionally, the same sort of watch out for ganks is still very much the case with many scenarios that aren't boss fights, and plays out the same exact way in terms of placements and what sorts of enemies exist for that role. Overall, the open world aspect is neat for the initial area, kinda falls flat by mid-game, and is somewhat improved, yet jarringly all over the place by the end. You'd think that the open world aspect would turn the formula more on its heel, but it's more like it's Nioh that just so happens to be open world, rather than Nioh's signature take on open world. In essence, it's like retrofitting Nioh's design with something that doesn't quite work by the omission of the expectation of the good stuff that you want in open world designs. If you were to carve out these open sections and turn them back into instance level designs, you'd probably find a more watered down version of Nioh, as that's kind of what the game entails. If it's one thing I disliked, it's that some places are sectioned off by side quests, so it feels awkward to attempt to get out there and explore, only to find out you spend a bunch of time looking around for no reason, as you cannot get in there if you didn't accept someone else's side quest first. Additionally, a lot of the music is repeated from previous titles, which is not great even if I do like a lot of the tracks. Is all that bad overall though? Well, I guess, as there are far more better open world experiences, but I also don't think I've been entertained as much if it was the exact same structure that the previous games take, as they'd likely catch as much flack for that too. This is Team Ninja's second attempt at open world design, I believe, with Rise of the Ronin previously, and I hope they keep refining it if they keep at it, especially for 3's DLC. Some of the content, especially in late game, I would have expected to be mandatory, but is surprisingly optional. There definitely needs to be more yokai as the new stuff is rather sparse, and more battle scroll missions, or the game's attempt at its older style content, but I think that the latter can be added over time. But in terms of the base game experience excluding New Game Plus, the game feels similar to Nioh 2, but with less interesting or diverse things to shake up how you engage with the game. I'm not a fan of the changes of the weapons, as some options such as the tonfas, dual hatchets, and kusarigama are exclusive to the ninja mode, while they existed with stances and key pulsing previously, as I was looking forward to trying those as you would have in the older titles. More streamlining and less options arguably, as it's kinda awkward to have ninja versions of the sword and dual swords, so they really should have had all or most of the weapons available as samurai minimum, then an attempt at a 50-50 split. The new deflect guarding and overall fluidity to the combat feels better than the previous titles, however. Regardless, is it Nioh? Yeah, not at its best, or at least not yet, but it's still a decent experience that exhibits the strength of the series. I enjoyed playing it. For hardcore fans, it's more of a wait and see if its potential will be realized like Nioh 2's original launch, while the new players will likely enjoy what Nioh 3 has to offer. If anything, try Nioh 2. I'll leave gameplay of Nioh 3's final boss at the end to give you an idea of what it looks like when you can spontaneously defeat something that gave you a little bit of trouble. Look away now if you mind spoilers, of course. But in any case, thanks for watching and I hope you subscribe as it helps small channels like mine grow.
己の無力を思い知らせてやろう。